Just completed turn number 13. So the game continues to look like it's rolling towards an Axis victory. Really, the U.S. Is the only, not just allied partner, but really, if you throw the common turn in with the Allies, really about the only member of either one of those alliances that's holding up against the Axis. We'll start in the Pacific this time. There was a huge naval clash in Sea Zone 38 in Japanese home waters. And as you can see, there's no Japanese ships left in Sea Zone 38. So the U.S. did come over. Well, first, let's backtrack a little bit. The Japanese came up into Sea Zone 39, and they actually had a good turn. They sent their aircraft and then a couple of subs and one destroyer. And I think they only lost one sub, and they took out a couple of U.S. destroyers, a couple of U.S. light cruisers. And the main thing was they took out the two U.S. transports that were there in 39. So they've stranded. The U.S. now has stranded on this Japanese island 2 medium armor and 2 infantry. So that was by far the main goal of the Japanese going up into 39 was just taking out those U.S. transports. So now that they can't get to the Japanese home islands, get down to Tokyo. And Japan did also buy a bunch of naval units this last turn, mostly subs and destroyers, as kind of like cannon fodder, because they figured the U.S. was going to go into Sea Zone 38. Japan also started pulling back the remnants of the Navy, of the fleet that had destroyed the British off of Cairo. So they started bringing these ships over, a couple of battleships, a battle cruiser, and a couple heavy cruisers. They also, down in South Africa, started moving up from the Union of South Africa, took 3 more British territories worth only 1 IPP, but there's really not much in South Africa to oppose the Japanese. And they left a light carrier behind to continue with a fighter to continue to guard those Japanese transports. Japan also continued to move units to the border with the CCP. So it's all ground units, so some cavalry and some infantry, but they're starting to put money into the Asian mainland to take on the CCP. So that was about it for Japan. The CCP, they finished off the KMT. Chiang Kai-shek and his ragtag army that was left in the mountains were defeated. So now the CCP is in complete control of China. For the second game in a row, they've won the Chinese Civil War. The Australians built another fighter, but really don't have much to do. The little fleet that they have is now in Hawaii being protected by the U.S. The U.S. brought a couple battleships and a fleet carrier up to Hawaii to combine with the Anzac transport destroyer and light cruiser. So then the main combat again occurred in Sea Zone 38. So the U.S., as you can see, all 6 of those battleships are damaged, but they've got the 6 battleships damaged, 3 heavy cruisers, 2 fleet carriers with 1 tactical each survived. The Japanese lost a whole bunch of naval units. They had, especially the first round, they had 6 rolls at a 6 and didn't get any hits with their planes and their 1 light cruiser. So I figured after that first round, when they were 0 for 6 on the 6-sided die rolls, that they weren't going to come out very well in the battle, and they didn't. They ended up losing 3 light carriers, 1 fleet carrier, 5 fighters, 5 destroyers, 9 subs, a couple of transports, a couple battleships, and a heavy cruiser, I think. And the U.S. in return lost, I think, 5 destroyers, a couple of subs, a fighter, 1 heavy cruiser, and then the 6 battleships damaged. So the U.S. came out really well, not only by completely wiping out the Japanese fleet, but suffering relatively minor casualties in return. And Japan, I'm sure they have about, with bonuses and their wartime economy roll, they have about $70 to spend this turn. So they'll probably drop a bunch of ships here, hoping to block off the remnants of this U.S. fleet before they can escape back to Hawaii. The U.S. has got to try to get somewhere to get those 6 battleships repaired. But I'm not sure they're going to be able to make it because the U.S. really has nothing coming over. They spent all their money in Europe, which we'll talk about in a minute. So it's just these 2 battleships and this 1 fleet carrier. So Japan, if they drop down, 10 naval units or so here in these Japanese home waters, it's going to be hard for the U.S. to get this fleet to escape back towards Hawaii before Japan can engage them. Not sure these Japanese ships down here will make it. They're still several turns away, especially the battleships only move in 2 spaces a turn. But just the stuff the Japanese spend here coming up on turn 14 might be enough to take out this U.S. fleet. The only problem for Japan is they wanted to start gearing up again to take on the CCP now that the Chinese Civil War is over with. The CCP is probably going to get aggressive with the Japanese. So Japan wanted to put money. They got 2 factories in Calcutta and 1 up in Rihe. So they wanted to start putting ground units and spending their money there. But they're going to have to try to finish off the remnants of that U.S. fleet first. So overall in the Pacific, Japan definitely still has the advantage. The Far East Command's pretty much completely eliminated. Anzac is stuck in Australia. The CCP is fairly strong with having won the Chinese Civil War. But if you look, they don't really have a lot going on. They did buy a fighter last turn. They put in that factory, but they've mostly got about a half a dozen cavalry and just a few militia and infantry. So they're really not in a position right now to really be hyper aggressive against Japan. And then the U.S., at least for the time being, again, by taking out that Japanese fleet was huge. But they have no transports in the Pacific, no way to get any ground units towards Japan itself. And having spent all their money in Europe this last turn, they really don't have anything coming up behind the naval units they currently have on the board. So Japan still is fairly secure, no danger of losing any of the money islands or anything they really have in Southeast Asia right now. In Europe, with the U.S., we'll start with them. So they spent all their money in Europe this last turn. They bought 4 more transports, 5 medium armor, and 4 infantry. They all placed in these couple of factories by New York. So they want to start getting units over into Europe itself. They've got to help relieve pressure on Russia. So on this next turn, the U.S. will be able to come over with 5 transports with 5 medium armor and 5 infantry. Here coming up on turn 14. They got a couple battleships and a couple destroyers to protect those transports. They also came down and brought a fleet carrier over to Sea Zone 79 and then landed a bunch of planes in Gibraltar. So in Gibraltar, you got 3 infantry, 2 medium armor, 1 light armor, 3 fighters, a tactical, and a medium bomber. So the U.S. was thinking about going into Spain a little bit, but thought better of it and wanted to ensure that they held on to Gibraltar. So that's why they brought all the air units over. And now they can actually take all these ground units on the 3 transports they have in this fleet. And if they want, they can vacate Gibraltar and come up and rendezvous with the U.S. fleet and transports coming over from New York and maybe land in France this next turn. Or they could stay in Gibraltar to try to hold on to that, / maybe go up into Spain itself. So the reason why they didn't go into the Med is the Italians had come over on their portion of the turn. Now, Italy was thinking about landing in Gibraltar itself, and this was before all these U.S. planes were there. They would have been able to land with 4 infantry and a bunch of planes, but the infantry are all regular infantry, not Marines, so they would have suffered double casualties. And the U.S. did have the 3 infantry and the 3 tanks there, so they didn't want to take the chance of losing their total landing force there. So they held off trying to take Gibraltar back. But they did move their entire navy here to Sea Zone 80 to dissuade the Americans from coming into the Mediterranean. So that total Italian fleet, you got a battleship, 3 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 regular subs, and 3 coastal subs. And then the 2 transports came down just so that they're protected by the Italian fleet. So that was more than enough. The U.S. at the time just had 3 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 1 fleet carrier. So the U.S. wasn't going to take on that Italian fleet. So Italy accomplished what they wanted to. They kind of blocked off the U.S. from coming into the Mediterranean so that Rome wasn't in any danger. The Italians put down a infantry and a tactical bomber in northern Rome, and then moved a battleship and a fleet carrier up 1 more space on the production chart. So that next turn here, both of those naval units will be finished off for the Italians, and they've already got plenty of planes that they'll be able to put on the fleet carrier. So Italy continues to build up a nice looking fleet in the Mediterranean. They also came down and took Abyssinia back, and then they moved over and took Transjordan, so they'll be able to get Iraq here on the next turn and get that couple of dollars for Iraq, as well as the military units. The British, not a lot they can do. Africa's pretty much completely lost to them. They pulled back to the Free French capital in Cameroon. The Free French put down militia. So the Allies are kind of making their last stand here in Central Africa. In the Free French capital, you got 3 infantry and 1 militia right now. Probably survive a couple more turns, just because all these Japanese units can only move 1 space at a time, well, besides the cavalry. But the stack of Japanese infantry only can move 1 at a time. So probably a couple more turns. But then you could see the French again lose a capital for the second time in this game. So the British mostly are concentrating now on getting back into Europe. So they bought, I believe, 3 more transports. So they've got a stack of 6 transports off of London, and they've got infantry in a couple of territories in England itself that they can move over. So I can see here on turn 14, the British landing first, probably somewhere in France, with their, at that point, it'd be about 14 infantry. And then the U.S. following up on their portion of the turn, bringing over their 5 infantry and 5 medium armor. Plus, they'd be able to land some planes in that territory, since the British would have then owned it at that point. So the Allies are definitely gearing up to land back in Europe. I'm not sure how successful it's going to be. France itself isn't guarded that well. You just got 2 infantry and 3 artillery in Paris. You do have this stack of upwards of 20 infantry in Western Germany. Plus the Germans have this last turn with bonuses and everything. They had almost $80 they can spend. So, I mean, Germany can just drop down a bunch of units here in West Germany and Bavaria. They can even just go all air units, so that by the time the Allies land, they're going to have these units at Paris that can counterattack, along with significant air units. They could buy as many as like 8 fighters. So I'm not sure that it's going to be that successful for the Allies. And initially, they'll definitely land with no opposition. I'm not sure they're going to be able to hold on to the territory they take in France, but they really have no choice at this point, just because Germany's really grinding down the Russians. And if Russia falls, then it's a foregone conclusion that the Axis are going to win. So even though the U.S. has other commitments they could be concentrating on, like, putting more units in the Pacific to concentrate on Japan, or maybe going heavy into the Mediterranean and deal with the Italians, neither one of those options will really relieve pressure on the Russians. So they've got to divert German attention, and the British and the Americans are going to go ahead and try a joint venture in France, and we'll see how that turns out. In Russia itself, the Russians did come back and take a couple of territories around Leningrad, Latvia, and then this territory just south of Leningrad. But as you can see, the Germans really, they moved into Kiev and took that. That was worth $3. And they just kind of moved everything into just a couple of different territories. So just in these two territories, this one territory outside of Smolensk, and then the one Polish territory, that's altogether about 15 mechanized infantry, 3 medium armor, 7 Stukas, about 10 self-propelled artillery, and 3 towed artillery pieces. So that will probably move up, all of that, move up maybe one territory and be right at the doorstep of Moscow. Then in Kiev, you've got about 8 more medium armor, about 5 self-propelled artillery. Romania's got half a dozen fighters, a couple of Stukas, and a medium bomber behind it. So Germany's got significant ground and air assets in Russia. They'll probably, again, be at the doorstep to Moscow. The Russians kind of just retreated some stuff back to Moscow. They've got about 15 medium armor, 5 mechanized, 5 infantry, and 3 heavy armor in Moscow. Stalin making his last stand there. Zhukov is down in Kursk trying to put up a little bit of buffer before Moscow, but it looks like that's going to fall this turn. In northern Russia, Leningrad just has a couple fighters and a couple light armor left, so Germany could divert some of the units up that way, but their main goal is Moscow right now. They also put down 8 medium armor in East Germany that will probably start moving up towards the Eastern Front. Down in southern Russia, Turkey was aligned to Germany last turn because they had taken Transcaucasus. So now Germany gets Turkey joining the cause and has all those units now and a couple of territories that had IPP value. The Russians did, on their portion of the turn, come back and take Transcaucasus, which it was too late to prevent Turkey from aligning, but it's worth $5, so that was good. And they've got 5 infantry now sitting in Transcaucasus. The Germans obviously will start moving these units in Turkey over one space at a time. So they'll be at the doorstep to take Iran or invade southern Russia from Turkey. So Russia's definitely got their hands full right now. That's why the Allies pretty much have to make an effort to go into France just to divert some of the pressure off the Russians. And if the Germans go ahead and spend all their money in Western Germany this turn, on air units or some mechanized whatever, then at least temporarily the Allies will have accomplished their goal of diverting German resources towards the Russian front. See how things play out after turn 14.